All right, after that last class, I'm just going to go over a few concepts in here, so I don't know how long this is going to take. Again, this is actually out of the Android book, but please remember that if you go through there, they talk about the fact that when you're working, you know this, that when you're working on an app, just like with a regular program, that if you want data to persist, you've got to do one or two things. You got to save it to a file, or you got to save it to a database. All right. So they start talking SQLite databases in here. Again, they give you a review. So if you don't remember this stuff, what a table is, what a schema is, and I think, I could be wrong, but I think when you guys all had the 147 class, did you have me or did you have Denny for that? I don't even remember.
What's 147?
Relational database development, the MySQL class. Did he talk a lot about schemas?
Oh, no, that one was Jim.
That was Jim.
Yeah.
I won't even ask then. Okay? But you should understand what a schema is. So if you're in MySQL and you say, for example, describe a certain table, and it shows you the field names, the field types, the sizes, and anything special that's put there, whether it's a primary key or whether it's unique or whatever, that's all the stuff that makes up the schema. All right? As it says here, it defines the structure of the database. All right. You should all know what a primary key is by now. Unique record identifier. So this is the same almost in both books. So they talk about what SQLite is. This is what's interesting. I'm not going to read to you, but if you look at this thing that's in blue, it's an embedded RDBMS. So in other words, it's in there as part of the actual package. So it's in there as part of Android, or it's in there as part of Swift. There's no standalone database server that runs. So you don't have to have XAMPP up with it. Think about why that's the case. If you were to create an app and you wanted people to run that app on their phone, they're not going to be able to connect to a server. This is done this way because, for lack of better words, it has to be done this way until somebody can go and figure out a better way of doing it, if there is a better way. And again, notice SQLite is written in C. As it says, the Android SDK provides a Java-based wrapper, and it's a little easier to work with, I think, than the one for iOS. And then they talk about SQL. You should all be familiar with that now. All right, we'll get into this stuff next week, but I just wanted to mention that because in here they have some stuff that's specific to, or that's general enough for both. All right, so again, they talk about it, same thing you just saw. If you go out to SQLite.org, they'll tell you more about the actual product itself if you have an interest in seeing that. All right. Now, notice, because these are some of the things that we're going to have to do. I just wanted to walk you through them. We're going to do these next week. But as it says, again, macOS is shipped with SQLite installed. But it says if you want to launch a session, you don't have to do this. Do you all know that if you go to, if you click on Finder, that one of the things that's under Finder, Finder's that little way to the left, it's the picture of the guy. And if you click on that, one of the things that's in there that will come up if you go down all the way is Utilities. And if you go to Utilities, then one of the things that's in there is Terminal. That's the equivalent of your DOS prompt. All right, but in Macland, for lack of better words. And if you do that, you type in something like this, okay? As it says, you change the directory and you run that kind of command. Notice at the prompt, commands may be added. So what you can do once you've gone in and you've started to create databases and the like is you can actually run SQL commands right from there. It's like being at the command prompt in the regular MySQL and being able to type stuff in. It's very similar in nature. All right? Again, you don't have to do that, but you can. You can even create databases. You can create tables. Does that stuff look familiar? All right. So again, this would create a table contact that has what? 4 fields in it. an ID, which is an integer primary key that auto-increments, a name field, which is text, an address field, which is text, and a phone number, which is text. All right, and then unlike where we always said show tables, now you do dot tables, and it does the same kind of thing. This should look real familiar to you. I believe in SQLite context, because I've never tried doing it without putting in the actual names here and the word values. All right, there's shortcuts that you can use in MySQL. All right, but I've always done it like this. So insert into table name, then in parens, all of the fields except what? The ID, because it's auto increment, right? And then values, and as you know, if it's a string, it has to be in double quotes. That shouldn't be anything new to anybody. Select star, again, nothing new. Select star where, nothing new. All right. Okay. Now, here's where it starts to change a little bit. Preparing an iOS application project for SQLite integration. Notice, by default, the Xcode environment does not assume you will be including SQLite in your app. It's kind of like, because the same reason that why do you have to import different things into a Java program, Java, Android, whatever? Because Java has no way of knowing what you're probably going to be using. So it gives you a minimal number of things, and other things that you want, you have to import. That's, in essence, what you're doing here. All right? So it says, first, the project needs to be configured to include this library, libsqlite 3.dylib. It's a dynamic library. All right? So it says when you want to do this, and we're going to, they don't show it pictorially. I wish they would, but we'll do it as a class next week. It says the target entry. You may or may not remember target, but that's one of the things that comes up when you start to create your project. All right? But as it says there, the target entry, we have to display the summary information and then click the Build Phases tab. And if you say, I don't get it, remember that screen that comes up when you first bring up your project? It's got a bunch of stuff in it. It's got the name of your project. It just looks like a bunch of listings of stuff. We're going to have to go in there and basically add this. All right? That's what they're saying, for lack of better words. All right. Then, just like you saw in the last class, what they mention in here is, again, SQLite was written in C. If you want to actually use C calls, you can. But your code becomes pretty big pretty fast, because you saw how it was when we had to have, when we wanted a list view to talk to an array, how we had to use an array adapter. That wasn't that bad. But think about it if you want one language to talk to the other language. All right, because C and Swift are two different languages. All right. So as it says, typically what you do, rather than doing that and making a bunch of C API calls, then typically what you do instead is you use what's called an SQLite wrapper, and there are several of them. As I mentioned to you earlier, the FMDB, and does it stand for something? The DB is database. I don't know what FM is. It probably is, might even be in the book. I don't know. I've never really looked it up. All right. But as it says, it was actually written as an Objective-C wrapper, but it works, all right, fine with Swift. The author says that he chose it because it's been around for a while, it's considered to be stable, it's feature-rich. In other words, it should have everything that you need. All right? When you start to work with that, you have to add a lot more code now. So as it says, when you implement it, okay, it'll be necessary to utilize a number of classes. The ones you'll use most often are the ones that are shown right here. FM database, which represents, as it says, a single database, the object on which SQL statements are executed from within code. The first example that we look at in here is going to be a simple database with just one table. But this stuff does support multiple tables, and it supports joins, etc., all the goodies that you've learned in other classes. FM result set. What a result set is anytime you write a query and you run the query, the results that get returned are referred to as a result set. If you don't save those results someplace, they're dynamic. They go away. As soon as you put in your next query, they're gone. And as it says, FM database queue. All right. It says it's designed to allow database queries to be performed from multiple threads. So you can have several different things working at the same time. Now, I didn't even go out here, but let's try it and see. Okay? Because it says out on GitHub, these are all hyperlinked. All right? I don't know if you've got the desire or whatever to look at this, but if you want to, you can. All right? And this is a pain in the ass. I'm just telling you. And the reason that it is in the days of Objective-C, before there was Swift, you didn't have a nice file like a .swift file like we have now. All right? You had two different types of files. You had a .h file, which was your header file, and a .m file, which was your implementation file. When you go and you bring this stuff in, you're getting both the .h files and the .m files. You're getting all those. I don't know if there has been a wrapper that's been written that's just Swift specific. I would guess if there was and it was any good, that's what this guy would have used. But I have not investigated that. So the reason I'm telling you that is the author mentions in here that when you start going through and you start doing that stuff, you're going to actually have to go in to the header file, and you're going to have one of the header files and actually make a change in there. All right? All right. So what are we doing here? My database is a local variable that's going to be connected to whatever that database is. All right? Well, if it's nil, it couldn't be found, so typically you just return. There's no reason to go on. Otherwise, you try to open it. Does this sound familiar? Isn't this exactly what we did in PHP? We tried to connect to MySQL. All right? Then we tried to, once we could connect, we tried to see if we could either open a database or create a database. And if it was open, we opened it, and then we tried to look and see if we could also, start working with tables. And that's the same stuff they're talking about in here. So again, I'm not going to read this to you, but you should look at that. Looks familiar to you. This is almost the same kind of way that we did it when we were working in PHP. We stuck it into a string, and then we called like an execute query. So the good news is, even though syntactically it's a little bit different, all right, stylistically and what's happening under the hood and syntactically it's different, but logically we're doing the same kind of thing. And it's always, you should close it when you're done, okay? So the example that they put in here is really, really simple, all right? Just so you know. They go through a few other things. Again, it'll help a lot more when we do this as a class. This is the interface. Name, address, and phone number. If you remember, the database that they had you create had 4 fields: an ID, a name, an address, and a phone. That's what these are, all right? This label that's right here, this thing that you see right there, they actually, when you create the interface, all right, label text field, label text field, label text field, label, that's designed to hold basically a record of information. So you can put all that stuff together. Jeff Scott, 6004 South County Road G, 608-757-7784, type of an idea, all right? And then there's a save, and there's a find. Those are the buttons. So every time you put in a new record, you click save. When you click find, you'll be able to basically have it run a search for you, where you can search, I think it's by name, and it might be by phone number, I don't remember, all right? But the point is, it's a pretty simple interface. So start thinking about this when you're doing this. Well, let's see. I'm gonna have to do what? I'm gonna have to set up an IB outlet, an IB outlet, an IB outlet, probably an IB outlet for this, an IB action, and an IB action. In the next chapter, they're going to talk about core data, and they use this same exact example, but they have you do it using core data. So what I figured we would do that Tuesday that you come back is we'll go through all of these. They're examples that they have in here. We'll do the one, hopefully we can do that in an hour, maybe we can't. All right, but I'll have done it beforehand. So, hopefully any kind of errors or problems that we run into, hopefully I'll have already experienced those. And ideally, again, we'll do that in the first hour, then in the second hour, we'll change to core data. All right. So he talks about this, and he mentions the different things that you're going to need in here, like, the outlets, etc., and the actions. So he shows it to you right here. All right. So when you start going through this, you're going to do something similar to this, not identical, but similar to this also in the land of Android. But notice what it says. When the application is launched, it will need to check whether the database file exists. If it does not exist, it will create both the database file and a table within it to store that user information. So the code to do that is shown right here. Now, some of it looks a little bit weird, probably, all right? But let's talk about some of the key points here. Well, there's the name of the table, all right? And here you're saying, basically, I want to create it, and if for some reason I couldn't, let me know. Then I want to open it, all right? And if I can't open it, what am I doing? I'm telling it to create a table because now I know the database exists. All right. For some reason I can't create the table, give me an error. All right. Otherwise, okay, for now you can close it. And that's what they're explaining in here. I'm not going to read this to you. I'm just kind of going over and summarizing what it says in here. All right. Then notice what you have to do too. Think about what you're doing in here. Again, look at this and think about when you click save what has to happen. And I'll tell you right now, it's 5 things. You have to take the record and write all those fields to the database. That's 1. Then you have to take whatever was in the name field and set it back to the empty string. Then whatever was in the address field and set it back to the empty string. Then whatever was in the phone and set it back to the empty string. And if you've got anything in that label right there, you got to set it back to the empty string. Does that make sense? That's what you've got to do. And that's exactly what they're showing you right here. They give you a status where they say that the contact was added.
Can we add an image?
Can you add an image? You can add whatever you need to. You could put images in there. All right. But the thing is, again, it's just like adding an image in any kind of database. Technically, what happens is the image itself doesn't go in the database. The address of where the image exists in memory is what goes in the database. All right, but you can, yeah. All right, so now we've got the stuff in there. So now we've got to go through and we've got to go and check, okay? And you'll see in here, if you look, that in quite a few places you have either an exclamation point or you've got a question mark. Because remember, it's possible that you could mistype something. What happens if you select the find button that's in there, or the search button, whatever it was called, and you put nothing at all in there for your criteria? Right? And that's what they're talking about in here. So if you put in nothing, basically, you want to hit it with an error message. And it's always important as you're going through this stuff to try to make it as simple as possible for the person running the app. Right? You never know how much sophistication they do or they do not have. And here you put something in, okay? And whatever it is they allow you to check on, all right, select address, phone number, where name equals. So you can put in somebody's name, all right? And if you found them, record found, and you basically, you end up filling in all this stuff with that current database record, all right? And if they don't exist, you just come back down and you say record not found. You could change this any way you want, and I guess that for right now at least, that's all they're letting you check on is the name. But you could have it set up so you could check on an address or you could check on whatever. And that's it for the example. So they show you an example in here. All right, they typed in Tim Cook and they click find, and it filled in everything that you see right there. All right. Now, depending on your point of view, I would think, at least for most of you in here, that's probably the easy way of doing it. And that's the easy way of doing it because you have experience working with databases. But again, since not everyone does, iOS decided that they're going to allow you to use core data. The interesting thing about core data is what core data is really under the covers. It's another wrapper around SQLite. All right, but it's set up for people who basically know just about nothing about databases. So they go through this, and I'm not the one really to be talking about this stuff. They talk about the stack and, man, all the stuff that's in here. All that stuff that's in here gets discussed down below. All right? The key thing is when you look at the top of the app there, that's the app itself. When you look at the bottom, that's your database data. So you see there's a bunch of levels in between there. All right? And if you want more managed objects in the context, etc., you can go and read that. Okay? But look at this. Entities can contain relationships. Does that sound familiar? One-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many? That should sound familiar to you. All right? They will talk about different kinds of relationships in here with the fetch property. Let's just hold off on that for right now. All right? But what you end up doing is something that's more graphical when you work with this. All right? And what you see there is almost like looking at like either a UML diagram or really a database relationships diagram. Again, I don't know if you guys looked at that kind of stuff. I have no idea. But the idea when you take a look at it, it's showing the relationship. So what that is, when we look over here, that is what, I can't read that even, if that's sales and contacts. All right, it's going to talk about the relationship between these. But the idea when you start working with all this stuff, now notice this. You may not have seen a lot of stuff that looks like this before, but anytime you start something with an @ sign and NS, that's almost straight Objective-C. All right. So you can come in here, you might look at that and say, wow, that's a lot easier. That looks a lot better, contact.name, et cetera, et cetera. But you still have to write code. And they're your retrieving objects. You still have to write code. You're accessing data. You still have to write code. So again, they come in here and with this core data tutorial, as I mentioned, it should look really familiar to you. I'll go back to that stuff in just a sec. There's your interface. It's the exact same example that you saw in here earlier. All right, so they go through what you have to do to create a core data-based app. Notice the first thing, creating the entity description. You have to literally put some stuff in there. It'll fill out some of the information for you, but you have to let it know exactly what you're doing and how you're doing it. And once you do that, okay, and you put in there basically the names of your fields, you're putting in the schema. All right? And then it'll start to build information for you. Okay. The user interface, okay, that looks pretty much the same as what you saw before. Much of it is going to look very similar to what you saw earlier. Okay. And they go through again retrieving, and they go through the search, and they go through everything. So if you get a chance between now and Monday, please look at the 4 chapters in each book. Yes.
Now, maybe you covered this, but what's the big difference with the SQLite and the core data? Is it just syntax?
No, the core data is basically, it's designed for people who know nothing about databases.
It looked a lot alike.
The code is very similar, but what happens is you build it and you fill in the schema. So you let the system know what the name is, you got that. Basically, you look at it, it's like you got a form, and you say, give me the name of the field, give me the type of the field, let me know the size.
The other one just does it on the fly?
The other one, you're putting in there, but you're putting in there as database instructions.
Right, okay.
All right, so that's the wrapper part that's around it. All right, so that's what we're going to do in this class, and what I want to do in the other class, in the Android class, is to finish up that to-do app. All right, and after we finish it up with files, go into it and start looking at how do we do that with databases. All right, that's enough. We've all had enough.